providing for consideration.
Hello, welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set and live is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
I remain simple, easy, and some of the fans suggest that perhaps I should weigh in as an awesome son of Africa.
That's very good to hear.
You like that?
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Yes. A warm welcome to you all. Our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday, and today we'll be looking at some of the highlights that have made the headlines here and across the world. Perhaps let's start here in the United States. Of course, most people are still talking about the abrupt death of basketball, football star or legend Kobe Bryant. Your reaction?
Basketball megastar.
Your reaction,
Kobe
Shaka?
Bryant. Well, you know, it's very unfortunate because when you look at how the world has reacted to his death, and his daughter, Diana, who was supposed apparently to succeed him, really, because he did not have a boy. And that fans used to ask him, when is he going to get a boy? Who is going to succeed him? And his daughter was right there and said she was ready to actually walk in his shoes. And they had such an incredible relationship that the dad decided, in fact, to go out and train her and prepare her to actually replace him.
You know, I usually find it interesting, especially for people who keep talking about boys, boys, boys. I have girls, and to be honest with you, I find them remarkable. They're very young, but what they do or likely to do in the near future does not stop at being a girl.
I know that you are particularly very close to my friend Victoria, who I refer to, of course, as Narubali.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see you do that.
Yes, but Kobe Bryant had something that even went beyond just basketball. He had the ability really to sort of transform this game. As we speak, there is this online petition that has started yesterday. People want him to become the face of NBA.
Really?
Yes. He had a global impact.
Very interesting. First of all, he basically joined the NBA when he was very, very young. And it is very unusual for someone to join the NBA from high school, secondary school, not college. When you join from high school like he did, it means that you are uniquely gifted, really, in the game. And, you know, off the field, he was apparently also a nice person. He's a man that was accessible, apparently, from all indications. He had some kind of humility, really. But when it came to doing his business, he obviously was one of the best that ever played the game.
Yeah, you know, a lot of people talk about Michael Jackson, but as far as I'm concerned, Michael Jackson was the other generation. In this generation, I think Kobe Bryant, for me, was by far the best NBA player that I've ever seen on the court. I've been to a couple of games, and one of the games, actually two of the games I attended, basketball games, was where Kobe Bryant was playing.
Guess what? Kobe Bryant is in fact on record saying that Michael Jordan was pretty much his role model. So Kobe actually, in a sense, sat on Michael Jordan's basketball shoulders. And once you do that, you know, of course, what we always talk about. You see a little bit further.
And there are people who say that his game transcended borders. When you go to China, his jersey is the #1 selling thing in China. And this is even before his death. Now think about how people are going they're basically going to immortalize him after this whole thing.
I was actually watching a reporter on BBC who was reporting from Singapore, talking about Asia, and he said the people in Asia, when they heard about Kobe's death, they actually went crazy. So you're right. I mean, this was not simply an individual. This was really a phenomenon of sorts. But the problem here again is with the American media, really. When you think about it, Paul, there were 9 people who died in that helicopter. And initially, they talked about 5. But in fact, at the end of the day, it is as if it is Kobe Bryant who actually died in that helicopter.
And the daughter.
And the daughter. So it seems to me that the media here really has to be a little bit very conscious, because you are a human being, no matter whether or not you are a superstar, you are a megastar. So I think sincerely the media should be able to respect the relatives and the parents, and the loved ones of these other people who were on the helicopter. As a matter of fact, they talked about one of the passengers was a teammate, a colleague of, Kobe Bryant.
Yeah.
And you talk about, of course, the helicopter had a pilot. The pilot obviously was the man that was moving them around. So it's as if the helicopter did not have any particular individual flying it. I think that is really where the media goes a little bit low.
Yeah, I think you make a very, very good point. I think, and I speak maybe for all of us here, I don't think even us, we've done a great job covering the story, because we've focused on just 2 individuals. That's Kobe Bryant and the daughter. Let's move on. Shaka, that's a great segue. Let's move on. Let's talk about the impeachment. Of course, the last 2 weeks have been preoccupied by what's happening here in the U.S. Capitol, the impeachment of President Donald Trump. As we speak, Trump's lawyers are sort of like rebutting what the Democrats put forward, and the way it looks like they came prepared. Last time we were talking about them as not being prepared, but when you look at some of the things they have put out there, there's so much that we've learned to this point.
I think they are good at what they are doing, but my problem is that they actually seem to be focusing on Joe Biden. Joe Biden is really not part of this impeachment. The impeachment is about U.S. President Donald John Trump. It is about the telephone call, for example, that he made to the president of Ukraine. I don't see, frankly, how Joe Biden becomes the key, other than the fact that it becomes like what you would call a red herring, a diversionary in a sense. Because you know why? Because they do not have facts.
Well,
the facts and the law seem to be on the other shoe, and they don't have, so they have to look for something to talk about.
Well, again, that's subject to different schools of thought. People who support the president say this is the best evidence against the Democrats they have seen so far. And if you speak to Democrats, they say precisely what you just maybe in a way summarized, saying that the whole thing is focused on Joe Biden. But there are those who say that maybe, if it wasn't for Joe Biden, this whole thing could not be happening. So maybe Joe Biden has a case to answer, or his son Hunter Biden has a case to answer.
I don't know. The Senate is supposed to be carrying out a trial. And in a democratic society, not an autocratic society, a trial is supposed to be very simple, straightforward. It is supposed to be transparent. It is supposed to be credible. And the only way that can happen, you have to allow, for example, evidence. You also have to allow witnesses to come and testify. But this is not it doesn't seem to happen. We don't even know whether that is going to happen. But whether or not, in fact, it happens, despite the fact that there are very important key players who have even publicly volunteered to testify. people like a former national security advisor of President Trump, John Bolton. He's been writing a book, and apparently there were some leaks reflecting the manuscript in which he really sort of, discloses what the president told him, especially about Ukraine and the essentially holding of funds in exchange for what the president had allegedly wanted the president of Ukraine to do for him, which of course amounts to a quid pro quo that he keeps saying that did not exist. And yet there is a lot of evidence, including one of his former ambassador to the European Union, who actually says there was a quid pro quo. So if you think in fact that you do not have anything to hide, why do you then go out of your way first to invoke, for example, executive, basically privilege? Or why do you make sure that the key individuals who interacted with you in terms of the business of the people of the United States of America do not get an opportunity to go and testify, to go and say exactly how they saw it? If in fact you think whatever information they have helps you, it seems to me that you would have no reason why you should not allow them to actually go and talk to the American people. Because when you think about it, I don't know whether you are aware of a character called Sherlock Holmes. It's a sort of detective, sort of, series. And in it, you reach a point where Sherlock says, if you eliminate the impossible, you remain, guess what, with the truth.
Yeah, interesting, Shaka. Since we are talking about corruption, let's maybe use the same, I will call it a metaphor for corruption, the quid pro quo thing here. It's not something that is not common in Africa.
The quid pro quo.
The quid pro quo. I'll just use it as a metaphor here.
As a matter of fact, if you don't mind, the Democrats pretty much saw that telephone call from Washington to Kiev as a reflection of corruption.
Right.
And the other thing that is very important, and especially that should actually be known, at least by our audience in Africa, is that the framers of the American Constitution decided that the occupant of the White House was not going to be a king, nor was it going to be a queen. It was going to be a servant of the people called a president, and that particular individual was neither going to be above or below the law. He was going to be treated just like any other American. This is something that is very hardly heard of across the African continent. You could probably talk about South Africa. Something like that could happen. You know where Mshorozi is right now. You could probably talk about, at one time in Madagascar, something of that sort happened. But for the most part, a president is somebody that would probably remind you of what used to happen to European kings, especially the kings of France. King Louis VIII, who used to say, "L'État c'est moi." I am the state, and the state is me.
Interesting.
In fact, the president at one time of Tunisia, Bourguiba, also used to say, "I am the system, and the system is me." That cannot happen here. And this is what is going on right here, whether you like it or not.
But before we go to the question, just a quick response here. these people are arguing that, yes, even if it can be proved, corruption is not impeachable. So how do you justify that if the lawyers are making that kind of argument that even if they were to prove it beyond reasonable doubt, it's not an impeachable offense?
I don't know.
So therefore, it's okay to,
I don't know. Maybe we are probably watching two different proceedings because, as a matter of fact, even though some of these statements have been made by a man such as Aaron Dershowitz, a man who is supposed to be a super professor of law at Harvard University, it has actually been found that some of his statements are not factual. He may actually be contradicted according to the law and the facts.
Okay, let's move on. Yeah.
The question is, do the Republican senators have the will to conduct a fair trial, a trial that reflects the values of the United States of America, the values and the dignity of the people of the United States? And guess what? This also happens to be an election year. So whether or not the trial ends up being fair or a sham, there is going to be another trial come November.
Okay, let's move on. Let's go to David Monda. How do you think Africa can address corruption given the entrenched system of patronage and which are a key to gaining access to the levers of power?
First of all, it is a very fair question and not a particularly easy question to answer. I can say right from the gate that what is needed really in Africa for the most part is what is said to be a paradigm shift. We cannot continue doing the same, more of the same. If you continue doing more of the same, expecting different results, it reminds you of a one Albert Einstein who would say, if you continue doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, that is insanity. I think that we need to have people on the African continent who become socially and politically conscious and aware of their relationship with this thing called the state or the government. They actually, most of them do not know that in fact they are the state, they are the government. Most of them do not know, for example, that they are the bosses of people who live in the State House, who are their presidents. They are the bosses of the Chief Justice. They are the bosses of the Speaker of their National Assembly. They are the bosses of their ambassadors. They are the bosses of their judges. And they don't know, obviously, because somehow the governments or governments have never felt comfortable to provide them some basic civic education. Because at the end of the day, Paul, no oppressor is going to be that good that he is going to be very kind to people that he is oppressing. It is going to be the oppressed people themselves who are going to figure it out and demand that there must be change.
But Shaka, quick follow-up, is fighting corruption the absence of this civic, being aware of what's going on? Is it the absence of that? Or it's inherently something that a lot of people are born into?
It's very interesting. First of all, countries have constitutions. Constitutions are supposed to be essentially the highest law or reflect the highest laws in the land. These constitutions are supposed to bring about order. They are supposed to help the governors govern according to the values of that particular society. In a society where there is social, economic, political justice for all, corruption is a crime. and it should be a crime punished. And it can only be punished if, for example, you have sets of laws that are seen to be broken, so that you can, in fact, have a situation where you have due process. And in all these countries that we are talking about, they claim that they have constitutions. But some of these constitutions have actually been transformed into what I would call personal manifestos. That is why some of these individuals who are democratically challenged actually find the constitutions as simply an ordinary piece of paper. They change it, for example, to remove term limits so that they can continue, being in power and doing whatever they want. That should, in fact, be corruption. I am not saying that a constitution is not a living thing. A constitution is a living thing and therefore could actually and can be amended and changed, but not be changed because of personal and political benefits of an individual, no matter how that particular individual thinks or his supporters think that that particular individual is uniquely gifted as something that has never happened. Some of these people look at themselves as if the best thing that has ever happened to them politically since sliced bread.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. And in fact, the international community should not allow to do business as usual with these types of people. They should bring about sanctions. Just in the same way, the international community has made a decision. If you are a general or you are a colonel, you actually carry out a military coup. You just carry it on your own, at your own risk, because nobody is going to do business with you. Nobody is going to recognize your government. I think it should be the same kind of policy being actually used to deal with these dictators who really do not care about their people. You see, individuals, Paul, or states or governments do not act on the policy of altruism. There are some individuals who are good and all that kind of stuff, but you need checks and balances. And I think it is the absence of checks and balances that brings about these problems. Look, people are suffering.
Yeah.
People do not, for example, have medicine when they get sick. When the political elite gets sick or feel uncomfortable, guess what? They go for medical checkup abroad and overseas. And in some cases, it is very ironic because they actually end up being treated by their own doctors who have since moved to those other places because they could not do their jobs back home.
Yeah, Shaka, let's do a quick follow-up. Let's go to Abdulrahman Jallo. What do you make of leaders who have taken advantages of ambiguities in the law? For example, he talks of Alpha Conde of Guinea, Conakry, Alassane Ouattara of Ivory Coast, and President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, just to mention a few, who are basically talking about changing their constitutions to hang on to power a little bit longer.
You know, when you look at what they have done, those particular cases you have mentioned, they have actually used the law to undermine democracy. It has not yet been used, by the way, I think, in the Ivory Coast.
They are planning to.
Yes.
And Guinea.
Have they already done it in Guinea-Conakry? But, you know, for those particular two individuals, sincerely, who are very highly educated, people that have actually done very, very respectable, international, powerful jobs, I cannot understand what they are trying to do. Now, the thing is, again, it should be both the people at home should resist those types of changes, because those changes are not in their interests. They do not reflect their interests. They rather reflect the interest of those particular individuals. The international community also, again, should step in and say, yes, if you change a constitution for personal and political gain, we are not going to recognize your administration, your regime. We are not going to do business with you as usual. If that happens, you will see a decrease in that kind of attitude.
Shaka, somebody here wants you to define what you mean by good leadership in Africa. Who is a good leader in Africa?
A good leader should, first of all, follow what their constitution requires them to follow. A good leader should be somebody, sincerely, who is a servant of his or her people. A good leader should do things according to interests as reflected in the constitution, in the laws of their land. I am not the kind of person that has the liberty of explaining to anybody really who should be the good leader. I think the people themselves on the ground know exactly the difference between good, not so good, and bad. You have election fraud, for example. You have people who claim that they actually conduct an election in order to choose leaders of those particular countries. And yet, these elections, obviously, some of them are neither free nor fair, not transparent. You have a situation where some of these incumbents, they basically choose who sits on the electoral commission of their countries. They actually decide at the end of the day who wins the election and who doesn't. And you expect that people should simply go ahead and go simply because somebody is very powerful, somebody controls the institutions. We need to have a society. We need to have countries that reflect checks and balances. We have countries, for the most part, all of them will tell you they have 3 branches of government, co-equal branches of the government. Like here in the United States, you have the executive, which is led by the president. Then you have Congress, you go on Capitol Hill, where you have the House of Representatives and the Senate. These are also 2 houses which are led by individuals. You also have the judiciary, the Chief Justice. These are supposed to be co-equal branches of government which can check and balance one another so that there is no particular branch of government that has a monopoly over the business of power.
Very briefly, Gabriel Joka says, what can the youth of Africa do to mitigate the travesties of unhealthy stay in power?
First of all, the youth need to prepare themselves by making sure that they are aware of what is going on, by reading and studying their history, studying their constitutions. I sometimes wonder, you even hear journalists talk about constitutions, and sometimes if you actually could ask them some very few questions about their constitution, you would be surprised that they probably never had the time to read their own constitutions. So we need to know what our rights are so that we can be able to assert them in order to get people who can actually govern us in a manner that is fair and just.
Well,
and then we have to mobilize.
On that note, we've run out of time. It's always a pleasure to host you. Thank you. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Xtra Time. Thank you.
You're most welcome, sir.